Hello and well met. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Fantasy Grounds, and this is version 4.8.2, latest and greatest version as of August 24, 2025. And what I'm going to be doing is kind of more focusing on linking and using the drag and drop features in Fantasy Grounds. I think this is one of the confusion points for navigation for Fantasy Grounds in regards to using it and also understanding it. A lot of other platforms use HTML, and they can do the at whatever actor within text for HTML. So Fantasy Grounds doesn't really use that, and it has kind of its own proprietary linking system. And a lot of people have complained that it's outdated and such, but I think it's kind of handy for preparing for campaigns and organizing your prep work. So what I'm going to do is just kind of demonstrate some of the things to look for and some of the things that may be not so obvious. So on the right-hand side, in most rule sets, you'll have very similar type of layout. This is the 5e rule set, but if you're going to be using Pathfinder or the Alien rule set, this kind of approach to organizing the information is pretty much the same. You're able to collapse this if you need more room, but I'll leave it expanded so that we can see all the different options. These might be named differently in a different campaign, so just kind of giving you a heads up. I also have this little pointer here, so if I left click, it makes like a pink kind of color. If I right click, it makes like a bluish color. So that way you kind of understand what I'm clicking on. A lot of the functionality in Fantasy Grounds, in most cases, I'd say about 85% of the time, you're going to be using a drag and drop method for moving stuff or for linking it or even for building characters. So quite often on most records, on the very top left corner, like up here, you'll see this little dragon icon. That might vary depending on the rule set and the theme, but always look on this top left corner of any data given window here so that you can drag it. So you can actually drag this record down to your hotkeys. And then when you want to bring this back up, whether it be over here or you have it sitting over here, you'll be able to open it up. So if I close this, it's going to remember the last location I had it open and the size of the frame. So if I click on the shortcut down here, that's where it's going to be. So if you know that ahead of time, placing your windows where you want them to show up the next time you need them is handy. You're not always going to know every single window ahead of time, but at least you can have the majority of them laid out. Same thing with this character sheet. You know, if I wanted to, this is Varric the Collector. He's a rogue. If I click on this link, that's the link to the character sheet. And I can take this record on the top left corner, left click and drag it onto the hotkeys. So if I want to bring that up again, and I don't want to, come over here and click on it, I can come down here and do it. So this is kind of the same with just about every record type that I can think of. So for instance, if you have an encounter and you want it to show up in a certain spot on a map, you can bring up a link for the encounter itself. And then what you can do is take this link and link it to something depending on what it goes to in the context. So this wants the D&D Player's Handbook. I'll just say yes. So this is the giant spider. It's a large creature. And this would be something that you might want to link either to a story entry or to a map or both. I usually do both just so in case I accidentally close a window and I want to get back to this. So let's just take a look at this. So this is the giant spider. This is in itself is already a link from the NPC stat block. So on the top left corner, this was drug over here into this encounter. It has to be unlocked, of course. So if I accidentally delete this, let's just say I delete it. Oops. I can take this top left corner of the NPC and place it back there. So this is your drag and drop functionality that kind of works across the board with, with the majority of the rule sets. I think the D&D second edition kind of does some of this, but the menus are different. There's more of a drop down. And they also got rid of that right click thing, so there isn't as much of that radial menu anymore. You generally have like a drop down window now instead, but they do still have some weird right-click dialogues that people aren't really used to. So that's something that frustrates newer users if they use a lot of modern apps. So this is another thing that can be done. So I'm going to take this encounter and I want to bring up an image. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a map. It could be, I'll just use the cover for this. So here's a Dungeon Master's Guide, but you can pretend it's a world map or whatever you want to do. Or here's a regional map for Greyhawk. So you can link an encounter or a story entry or an image even to one of these locations. So these little pins here are how labels are, or how the areas are defined. So there isn't any way to change the color of these, unfortunately. That's been a request on the list, but basically the red means that it's not a shared link, and this is linking directly into the manual or the book. So if you go into the actual book for the Dungeon Master's Guide and you pull up the module, or you go to books and go to the DM's guide for the maps, you open that up, it's going to be in here. So here's the maps, and then the central Flanus is probably located in here, or it could be in one of the other books. But nonetheless, you can take that and you can link anything to anything just about. I can even link this character to this map if I needed to. So it kind of depends on how you want to organize your campaign and how you want to prep things. What I'll normally do is take some notes. So over here on the right, there's player notes. And then I'm going to click on add item. And this is just for the campaign. I won't necessarily be able to export this particular one unless I use a story entry. So if I'm going to use a story entry, that's a little bit more permanent. And what I'll do with that is take this link here, and this is a new link here. So what I'm going to say is I'll say game prep, and maybe I'll put a date on it. It just depends on what you're doing with this, but this is going to be my game prep notes. And this is where I'm going to organize that. So from here, I can make different text entries. So I can create a header block, and I'll just say campaign game prep sessions, something like that. And then what you could do from here is you can either build your own manual, or you can just leave it as this note and then make another story entry and link it into here. So if I wanted to take, for instance, let's go with this, and I'm going to add a text block. And what we'll do is we'll add our links here. So I'll take the map and link it here into this area. So let's see, I'll say session 0. And then I'll take this link here, see if it'll let me. Yeah, so here's our map that we're going to use for the campaign. And what I'll do at this time is I will locate this map where I want it to show up next time I bring it up. And I'm going to size the frame so that it's not covering a bunch of stuff. Right now it is, but when I go to organize this, I don't want this to cover all this different stuff on the screen. So I'm going to take this and resize the frame, and then I can right click, go to view and zoom to fit, and that will bring the map into it, so you can see the whole thing. And then if I close this and I need it again, it will come back up here. And then the nice thing is you can link back. So my game prep notes, I might stick this over here somewhere by the rose compass here. So if I want to get to this record easier, I can drag and drop it onto the actual map itself. And that way, instead of going back and digging through everything, I can just get back to my game prep notes from there. And then I can go back and forth fairly fluidly without losing my space, or, like losing where I was if you accidentally close a window or cover it up. It comes in handy if you double link them. The only thing about double linking these back and forth is that sometimes it can get very complex if you make a mistake or you need to fix it. So you got to keep that in mind. So session 0, I'm linking the map. I'm going to hit enter and control 1. That makes this a regular line instead of a link. So I'm going to make a link to the character record. So I can just say that maybe I have a bunch of characters. I just want to keep everything I need together. So I'll close that. I already got the map figured out. And let's just say this encounter is going to be one of the encounters I'm going to use in my adventure. So I'll do the same thing. I'll link this encounter to the section or session 0, and maybe this is the content that I'm going to be using for the next session. And that makes it easier for you to basically to kind of keep track of what you want to do in your campaign and make it a little easier so that you're not digging around everywhere looking for stuff. So that's really important in Fantasy Grounds for organizing information. And that's really what this linking does, is it allows you to link back and forth without having to go through like, for instance, let's say there was a section in here that you wanted out of the player's handbook, or maybe character creation is another one where you might want to link stuff down here on the links below. Or if you're going to be using it in your campaign, maybe for session 0, you'll have the main map, your characters linked here, maybe a couple social encounters, and then some links to the character creation content in case the players want to update their characters or fill out some background information. So it really depends on how organized you want to be. Some people run off the seat of their pants. They'll just load every single book they own and just dig stuff out as they need it, and that's fine. I used to run my games like that, but it's a little bit harder to keep track of. Although if you use the linking and everything you use, you link it to either a note or a story entry, and then later on you can go back and kind of round it out and update and kind of make more sense of it. So if I'm going to pull a random monster, let's say out of the NPCs, and I don't have anything prepared, I think I would just, like, if I wanted to use this, we'll just say, let's go with a bat. So let's just say I decide to make an encounter with a bat. So I'd probably take and drag the bat into an encounter itself. So if I go to encounters, and I'm going to create a new one, and I'll just say bats here, and then drag and drop this in here, and then I'm going to change it to like 5 of them, and then refresh the CR value. That's going to build that encounter pretty quickly. And then I'll take this bats thing and link it into my game prep note. So that way, when I come back next time, if I do have time to prep, I'll be able to, oh yeah, that's right. I added this encounter here. So now that encounter is kind of ready to go. And if you need to, you can add it to the combat tracker up here on top. You can add it to a quick map if you don't already have something prepared, or you can add it to the combat tracker, or both. So in this case, I'm going to do add to combat tracker. So that's ready to go. That's fairly simple to build an encounter really quick on the fly, and then link it to your notes. That way you can go back to this and say, okay, yeah, there was this encounter I added to the game. So you can have this little cheat record here and use that for your guide for your next sessions, or if you need to build more stuff later, you can. So I'd probably put that down there, and then this thing maybe here. And the next time I come back, if I need the notes, I can bring that back up rather quickly. So if I click on the link for the story entry that I made, so and this is uncategorized. So this is kind of the things that you'll have to decide what you want. But this was under the Dungeon Master's Guide, I believe, and I think it was campaign notes or something like that. But that's kind of what you'll run into if you're going to, create shortcuts and such, is to be able to link them to almost any type of record you want. That makes it a lot easier once you understand that. So if you use these links up here, you can drag the windows where you want them to be linked to, if that's a thing, if you wanted to do it that way. But here's like an intro, let's say. Here's your setup, and then here's the Lower Ruins encounter. So this is something you may want to explore as you're playing in your games and such. And when you prepare for a game, you may want to decide how this is going to turn out for you, and how much organization you're going to have to make it easier on you. Really, this platform does a pretty good job at organizing if you understand how it's set up And I think a lot of people are looking for a different way to do it. And I think they're coming from like Foundry and Roll20, and they're using HTML websites, which kind of does a little bit more intuitive job of linking things together. But I don't think the drag and drop's too bad. I mean, it's probably not the best in the world. And the thing about I don't like about it is that if you have like a mouse that only has 2 buttons, that kind of sucks for Fantasy Grounds. Or if you're using a trackpad, that's very annoying. So get yourself a mouse if you don't already have one. And it doesn't work on touch screens and stuff. So that's one thing that, a couple of things that really doesn't work too well. And some people have the magic mouse, with just 2 buttons. They don't have a middle mouse wheel, so that makes it harder to scroll if you have like a long document like this. So that's what the things that that really makes a game. It can make it more difficult, especially if you're not used to the interface. But like I say, a lot of these records can be linked. Just about anything can be linked into the records of pretty much any sort. And character records are kind of the same thing. So when you want to build a character, if it doesn't already have a character wizard, so like here's a level 1 character. If you don't have a character wizard, like the pop-up that kind of guides you through character creation, which in a lot of cases there isn't a character wizard, like the major rule sets like Fantasy Grounds like D&D and Pathfinder and some of the other newer ones have a character wizard. Well, like Cyberpunk, it has like this really cool way to build characters. But if it doesn't, the best way to do that or to make custom content, you'll have to use the drag and drop method. So this character is already partially built, but if I click on the rogue under this little gear cog, this has the class and level information. And all I'd have to do, honestly, is take this little link here and re-drag it into this particular set or into this window. So you could take that and drag it in here once you level up. So, or you can add an item here if you wanted to add a new subclass, or if you wanted to, like multi-class. But what I'm going to do is take that, and if you come over here to the character records, let's say we're going to go with characters. Let's go with classes. So let's say we're going to level up. So a lot of times, all you have to do is drag over the actual link, and it will allow you to level up. So if you come over here to Rogue, I drag and drop this in here, that's going to add another level. All I did was drag this link over to this section, and it added another level. Then over here on the left, it tells me what was added. So it's still taking advantage of the automation in Fantasy Grounds, because one, the class is built that way specifically for Fantasy Grounds with the right verbiage and such, and then also that's just the way the base of Fantasy Grounds works. You can use the character wizard also. So if you have a character wizard, not all rule sets do, but you would use this level up button rather than dragging and dropping, because a lot of people don't understand how that works. Or if you've been using Fantasy Grounds, some people prefer to do drag and drop instead of the character wizard, because sometimes a character wizard will miss out on things, especially for custom content or third-party content that's not actually official rule set material. So you can click level up here, and then you can get into this where you say, okay, I'm going to level up to Rogue, and now it's going to say, okay, now you need to pick your subclass. So you can sort by the source if you want. So I'm going to go, he's a collector, so probably just a thief. So I'm going to give him the thief subclass, so I'll add that. And then these are the features that you get. And then you could click on these and expand them to read what they actually do. But if you want to visit this later, let's say you're building the character, but you don't have time to read through these, you can take this link up here, left click and drag it to your hotkeys. So when you actually go to build up, when you actually go to look, you can click on that link and it brings you right to the subclass. So you don't have to go back and dig through your character sheet to figure out where that stuff came from. So these are the different options. So that's just kind of what you would expect with the character wizard. It's a little bit different for each rule set, but kind of the similar type approach. And then the features are just going to list what you're getting for the specific subclass, in this case for the 5e rule set. Once you're done, you can hit commit. And then what you're going to do is see if there's any warnings, and you can go back over the summary here and make sure you got everything set before you click on save. So this is the time to review, the time to go back and make changes. And also, once you're done, you can hit save and it'll save the record. So now it's up to 3rd level. I jumped up 2 levels. And what it does is it kind of adds another layer on top of what's already there. That's kind of how Fantasy Grounds works. Is it doesn't necessarily rewrite the entire character or make a separate one. It just kind of builds on top of the existing characters. So it's not going to necessarily change anything other than add these extra links or these skills or whatever it is that comes with it. So when I leveled up, it probably added some more features in here, which are links. You can manually drag these from a source if you have the source for it or if you have access to it. So this is just some things that you'll learn with Fantasy Grounds and how it works. Is a lot of dragging and dropping. So this left click and drag, if you don't have the dexterity, or maybe you've got arthritis, or, like I said, you have a trackpad or a 2-button mouse or something, it might aggravate you. So just kind of giving you a heads up on that. There are people who just can't do it. They just, like, their hand is too messed up, or maybe they have a disability or whatever. So it kind of makes it hard to do in that case. But I think all in all, once you understand how things can be linked together, and now you could store them in these shortcuts below, and how you can take records and manually drag them to other records, that's really the bulk of the navigation. And then once you understand how that works, it makes getting through a lot of the content pretty easy. The other thing that most people don't understand, or they may not utilize, is this filter up here. So if you have content, a lot of content loaded, like several different books, to focus on the content that you want to look at, you want to try to use the filter. So if I go to NPCs, this grouping up here shows everything that I have loaded. So this is the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, whatever books you have. So these are your monsters. But if I hit this drop down, I can pick either the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide, or even if I wanted to add another book. So if I come up to modules, and I think when I made this campaign, the monster manual wasn't out yet. So I'm going to go to activation, and I'm going to go to monster. And here is the new monster manual for the 2024 rule set. And there's a legacy one. So I'm going to load the newer one. And it might take it a couple seconds because there's a ton of images in it. I know that. And there we go. So now we have the monster manual. So it has a sorting method through this modules window. But when you're actually looking at the NPCs from the campaign directory over here on the right, now you have this menu here where you can actually separate or filter out the other books. So you're not looking at every single thing you have loaded. The other thing you can do that's really handy to kind of get into the habit of, is to create your own sections when you start building content on top of what's already there. So usually you click on this little edit button, click this plus button, it'll add a category, and it usually calls it group 1, group 2. So from there you can edit the name of it. So I'm going to put my custom NPCs or monsters, whatever you want to say. And then I'm going to click the edit button again to get out of the edit mode. Now I can take this particular filter for the groups and just filter to the stuff that I'm working on myself. It kind of gives you that separation between what's in the module or what's in the content and then what you're building. So in this case, maybe, let's go to the monster manual. I'm going to build, let's say I just want like I don't know, maybe I want a specific, or maybe a slightly different creature or something. All right, so here's some animated armor. Okay, so maybe I want different tokens and a whole, a revised stat block. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm just going to left click and drag this animated armor back into the same list that I pulled it from, and it makes a copy. which is no longer attached to the official books. It's now a record that belongs to the campaign that you're working in. So now what I'll do is I'll take this drop-down list and just scroll. I'm not going to select anything. I'm just going to scroll down, and I'm going to look for this copy in this little scroll list here, and left click and drag it to the custom section. So now it belongs to this group instead of just being uncategorized. So anything that's not associated with a book, like this Tower of Two Hazards, this is not it's not part of anything. It's just a random thing that I've built. But if I want to add it to my custom NPCs, I'll left click and drag that into that section. So now anything I've made custom outside of what was already provided, I'll have my own little filter, my own group. It doesn't change much other than what you're viewing and where it exists within the campaign organization. It doesn't change much of anything else. It's just another way to filter out, just kind of like using a spreadsheet when you use the filters, so you don't have to see every single cell. You're just looking at the ones you need to look at. So then I'll take this record, this animated armor. I might just say, instead of armor, I might change it to animated scale mail or something. I'll say animated plate armor. And I unlocked it, of course, and then I might change a few things around. Maybe I'll give it a few more hit points. Maybe it's 38 hit points, and maybe I'll change the stats a little bit. So since it's a kind of a heavier armor, maybe I'll give it more strength but less dex, something like that. And then maybe a little bit more con too, 14 instead of 13. And then you can add whatever traits, and if you want to update the notes or even the images, which you might. But this one looks good. It's already plate armor. But if you wanted it to be animated chainmail or something, maybe you'd find something that had chainmail armor. So it's kind of up to you how you want to organize it. But now when you're done, you lock it, and it no longer says copy now because I've updated it, customized it to my own liking for my particular game that I'm running. Now, where you might get backed into a corner is later on, you might say, hey, I like all this work that I did in this campaign, and I want to transfer it over to my next game. So in order to do that, it's nice to have these groups. And what I'll do is anything that I've built, I'm going to export that, and then I'll load it as a separate module in my next campaign. Ideally, you'd want to build it in a separate campaign first, but you're not always going to know that until you actually start playing. So before you get too far along, it would be nice if you could take this information that you've made and export it incrementally, but then that makes it hard because you're doing it like every session and it's just a ton of work. So what I would do is probably start the campaign, save it. Anything that I've built in the last month, I might export that as a module and then just kind of set it aside. And then maybe in another month, I would export it again. And anything that I've built or added would be added to the campaign record that I'm playing in. When I'm done with the game, then I would export a final copy and use that. So that would be my game notes for the rest of the campaigns if I run the same one again. But that's not very common. I think most people just build a few things and they'll run content that's already built for them. But if you're doing homebrew or a lot of custom work, you're going to want to start with a fresh campaign that's not your actual game and build in there and then export it out and run your games with the exported modules. That's kind of the best practice for that. But, for in this case, I already have content that's official, and I'll just kind of add a few things that I won't need to necessarily export it. But if you want to export it, it's more organized to do it in incremental steps, or you could do it once a month, or you can just start a new fresh campaign where you build everything and then you import it into this game for use for your players and such, or for your prep notes. So what I'll normally do is, let's say I've made a bunch of changes and I've got my own custom things. What I would do in this case, if I was going to export it out, and this happens, after maybe a few weeks or a couple months or even the next day after a game, is you'll want to save your work. So it's saving it in this campaign, but it's not easy for me to take the same amount of work that I put in here and put it into another campaign that I might be running for different people. So that's kind of why you want to have a base campaign and work from there outward to your play games instead of doing it the other way around where you're going to play for a while, build stuff, try to export it as you build. It gets kind of more difficult, a little bit more work. It can be done either way, but it's a lot of work. So what I would do here, let's just say I was all done running the campaign. No one else is playing in this. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, this is my base campaign now. And all the players have moved on to other games, or maybe we're going to play a whole different system or whatever. So what I would do is come into my books here under the modules, and under activation, I would probably just deactivate all the books that I don't need. So if I use load filter, this will only show the stuff that I have loaded. So I'd unload everything here. And whatever's left, other than the character here, is going to be what's going to be exported. So it's not going to be as reliant on links that are already part of the adventures that are, official. And this basically will be just the stuff that's left over. There's no more, there's nothing left in the other. I've already closed everything. So I'd probably export it at this point. I'd probably clear the combat tracker. So menu, delete from tracker, only non-friendlies. I would probably right click and delete this character too. So I try to get it kind of cleaned up before I export it, with stuff that I'm not going to need. It's not that big of a deal, but it does make it a lot nicer when you export the module. And then when you come over to the modules themselves, you can click export. And this is where you give it a file name, a thumbnail, if applicable, just a little 100 or 200 by 200 PNG file or WebP. Give it a name, display name. So that's optional. Like if you have a formal name and it may be a display name, give it a category label, put your author name in here. And if it's a player module, you'll click that. So if it's character creation, you would have that. If it's read only, then that would be in case, it's only for reading and not for editing the records. And then any rule set would be if you want this to be like a map module where you don't want to necessarily have it just for 5e, maybe you're just building maps, so you might want to click that, or a token module where you have tokens that can be used in any rule set. Essentially, you take any records here. You can do all. I usually do all of them so I don't forget, but you can click all and it will select all those. And if you have these record types, let's say by CR, by letter, by type, that sort of thing. And then when you hit export, it will create a module. And just remember not to give it any weird titles with like accents or anything like that. You can use underscores, but if you use anything other than alphanumeric, just keep it very basic and simple. I know there's people have used accent marks and weird characters, and when it saves, for some reason, it won't load in Fantasy Grounds or it does some weirdness. So gotta be careful with file names. That's the same with characters. I don't know if they have ever changed that, but if you have a character and you save the name and it has weird, like an accent or a hyphen or something weird like that, sometimes the characters won't save properly or you can't load them. So I don't know what it's like a something to do with the way it's set up, the actual base program. But anyhow, that's kind of a lot of the navigational things that you'll notice. And just to make things easier on you, start using the links. Make yourself a story entry or a note, and then just start taking that information and using it to your advantage, and use it to organize your content. It also helps you focus on what you need to do for the next session or before your game. It is a little bit of prep, but once you get the hang of it and you figure out a methodology and how to name your files and how to left click and drag things where you want them to be and sizing the windows to where you want them to pop up the next time you use them, it makes it a lot easier, because then when you open up a record, it's not always going to be in the middle like it usually is. So if I've never, let's say I haven't opened up skills yet, but now it's in the very center and it likely is going to be covering everything. So if you take the skills the first time you open it and you move it to where you want it to show up the next time, and then you close it, it's going to show up there where you left it, the position. And if you leave it open, let's say like the setup window, if I leave this open and let me go to the characters, and let's say I want this character here, and I'm going to put them on the combat tracker again. When I come back to Fantasy Grounds, it should be like this when I load it up. So we'll test that. But there is an option in the actual settings up here. So if you go to options, it's already on by default, but it says restore Windows on start. It's on, normally it's on by default. So if that is on and you leave these windows where you left them, and this is how you want it to be when you come back, this is kind of what you'll go through. And then that way it's not like you're not having to figure out what was active at the time and that sort of thing. So if I right click and go to return to launcher, when I come back, it should go right back to where I was. So if I click on this 20 D&D campaign that I was in last, technically it should bring up whatever I left open. It will still remember the position in most cases, unless you've done some kind of reverting, because you can reset your campaign. So if you've done that, you might lose your positions and the content that you were working on. But sometimes you have to revert the campaigns, and that comes up when you are in the middle of a campaign. Fantasy Grounds updates a module that you're in, and there's something wonky going on, like maybe they changed something. You might have to revert it back, which could erase some of the work you've done. So use that cautiously, but there are times when the map record doesn't look right and it needs to be refreshed because they've went in and updated the changes to it. So this is we're right where I left off. So, but you got to leave the windows open, otherwise these won't come back up. However, the positions are preserved. So if I click on this and it's down here in the shortcut, it knows where I left it. If I move this over here and close it, you can take a guess of where it's going to be, where I left it. So get in the habit of dragging these records where you want them to be, size the frame or the data window, however you want it, and leave it there. And then if it's in the way or you don't need it anymore, you could close it. But next time, just know that it's going to be in this area, because that's where you left it. You're not always going to know where you left things, but if you do it the same way every time, it really helps. So like I always have the combat tracker here, I always have the chat window here, the dice tower right here. Usually I'll put my maps in the upper right hand corner. So anytime I have a map, I'll put that up there. Down below here, I'll have my notes or the campaign. And then over here, I'll have the NPCs and the players. So for instance, for NPCs, I need to go back into modules. I'm gonna go back to activation, and I'm gonna go with monster manual again. Load that and maybe the PHB. PHB. Anyway, so I'll just use that. So now that I have this monster manual, I can go to NPCs over here and go to the monster manual. And if I don't add this as an encounter, it's just going to be a straight monster in the combat tracker. Ideally, you'd want to add it to an encounter. That way, when you go to award the experience points, it makes that easier and for tracking in your game. So if you use the party sheet, and I'm going to put the player on there. This is generally when I make a campaign, I'm actually running a game. And then I'll go to the XP area. If you create an encounter, it's easier to award the experience points. If you just drag this onto the combat tracker, you just have to manually add the experience points to the characters. That's kind of how that works. But let me go to encounters and let's look at an aberrant cultist. So I'll take that, and what I'm going to do with that is take a look at it. Okay, so aberrant cultist. And then what I'll do is take this encounter, add a new encounter, and we'll just say cultist here. And I'll take this link, top left corner, like usual, drag and drop that there. So now that's just the beginning of this encounter. Now I'll take, and maybe I'm going to have 3 of them instead of just 1. And I'll hit this refresh and it will put in the CR value and the XP. Oh, that's a little strong. I might just go with 2 in this case. There we go. All right, so there's the cultists. And again, if this was going to be part of my campaign, I would link it to my notes or to the story entry that I had made. So maybe, one of these sections here, I'd have it linked in the stories. That way it'd be easier for me to find it, or in player notes in this case. Maybe you would use those, but you can use either or. But see, now you could put your encounter here, and then you can link this encounter wherever you need to link it in regards to your content in Fantasy Grounds. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you need it on your map or wherever these guys are going to pop up. But that's generally how you link stuff together, is kind of keep it there. But to my point here of doing this, so when you add this to the combat tracker, it's a little bit easier to do it from here once you have it built. And they're on there now. Let's say they're visible, and let's say they're dead. So once they die, or once you're done with that, you can actually bring the encounter back up. And then you could drag this encounter into the encounters area, and that's how you're going to award your players on the party sheet automatically, so you don't have to manually update their character sheets with XP. There's nothing wrong with that, just a little bit more work. So that's just something you might want to, explore. Just dragging and dropping and linking stuff is really where it's at in Fantasy Grounds. There's not too much else. I think there's some extensions out here that might automate some things a little bit more, but generally speaking, the drag and drop is basically how this system works. Once you understand that, it makes it easier. So I might link my party sheet down below so I have an easier time getting to it. But then I'd probably size it and put it down here. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Size this and put it down here in the corner. And then when it comes up again, or if I need it, it's going to come up there. And this thing too, I don't want it up in the middle of everything. I want it where I want it to be for next time. So when I bring up this encounter, I don't have to move it. I'm going to have it set where I want it to go. And another thing I do is once these guys are on the combat tracker, let's say you've got like 10 different entries, I'll take these and move them up here onto this area where I have the character sheets. So the character sheets are going to be in the same area as the NPCs. And once I have those size, they shouldn't be moving around much unless I reset or re-add them manually. So what I'll do here is when it comes to the turn, let's say this cultist, I'll click on the link here, and that brings up cultist 1 to the top of this deck here, the way I look at it. Then when I hit next actor, I click on this link again, it brings up that record. So if I need to look at anything, I can. It's like during combat. And now it's the player's turn. So I'll hit this down arrow, click on this, go to the actions tab, and there's the player. So if I need to help my player or look at what they've got, I got it right here. And then if I accidentally close these, they're already set. So I'll just click on these links again, and that'll bring them up where they were the last time I put them. So this is an organizational kind of a workflow thing that you'll learn over time. This makes it so much easier because I know there's some people that have these things spread out like this and it's covering the map and stuff. There's nothing wrong with that if you really need to look at all these records at once. But generally speaking, I don't think I need to look at every single thing at once. I can only look at one thing at a time. So I usually stack them up here like a deck. And then that way I can use the combat tracker to bring it up to the top of this pile here to make it simpler for me to run the game instead of moving windows all over the place. You lose a lot of time and you just get frustrated. So I try to eliminate that as much as possible. So a little bit of homework, a little bit of prep, a little bit of knowing what records you can link to what, and getting used to how this thing was designed. It really helps a lot. So kind of up to you. But anyways, hopefully that's helpful. I know there's a lot of blah, 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 but I just get into the semantics of how you move stuff around, how you link things together, what things are best practices for organizing your desktop, because you run out of room really quick. I think that's frustrating for most people. And I have this scaled to like 105 so that it can be a little bit more visible on the stream. But when I'm actually using it, I usually put it down to about 90. So I will say scale UI space. I did a / scale UI. I'll go to like 95%. And that gives me a heck of a lot more room. So when I'm actually playing and not doing a stream, this is how much room I'll have. But it does shrink the text, so just keep that in mind. But this would give me a lot more room for maps and such. But when I'm doing these presentations or such, I usually do scale UI. I'll go with 105, I think. And that makes it bigger, a little bit easier to see on the stream. But you can go bigger. You can go up to like 200%. The problem with that is, though, that you start running out of desktop space, and it can be frustrating. So you have to find a happy medium between sizing and readability. Is kind of how that plays out. A lot of people have asked for larger fonts. The problem with the larger fonts is that you can scale records horizontally, so the letters or the fonts could be wider or thicker, but you can't scale vertically. So this little text field here, if you go beyond what it was designed for, it gets cut off, and you can't. So even if you had a bigger font here, there's only so much room, and it has to do with all the spacing and how the graphics are laid out. So if you wanted bigger fonts, you can get some on the Forge. They'll just make them slightly bigger, which is better than nothing, but you're not going to get much bigger. These don't scale when you drag the window. So these cells here where the text is, they don't scale vertically. They only can scale horizontally. So that's a limitation of Fantasy Grounds and how they have it set up. But generally speaking, though, when I'm running a game, I have it scaled to either 100 or a little under 100%. But when I'm actually showing it on stream, I have it bigger. So maybe let me try it a little bit bigger. So scale UI 120. Yeah, so you can see it better, but then you run out of room for your data windows. So it kind of depends on what you're doing. So it's just kind of up to you. But anyhow, folks, I hope that's helpful a little bit anyways. And it's just a matter of getting used to how the system is set up and the way they have it. This drag and drop thing has been there since day one. And the font issue has been there since day one. I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon, but it helps to have a little bit larger screen. You don't need a gigantic monitor. It does help. A 15-inch screen is not going to be a very good experience. I'm sorry, but if you've got a little tiny laptop, it's going to be tough. It really is, especially if you're the GM. Players can get by because they just really need their character sheet and maybe a peek at the map, but they don't need all the stuff laid out like I had earlier. They usually just have their character sheet and maybe a map. But when you have the GM view, you got a lot more going on. So it can get really frustrating if you got like a 14, 15-inch screen. A huge screen doesn't always solve the problem. It just makes things a lot bigger. So you'll have to decide for yourself how that works. A lot of us are old, so we don't have very good vision. So wear your glasses if you need to. But anyhow, folks, take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.